Gundam Climax UC is a little bit of an enigma. It was released for the PlayStation 2, and like many Gundam games, it was never sold in the West. At first glance, it could come across as a full game based off of the Ace Pilot mode from Encounters in Space, while at the same time can come across as offering significantly less. The best feature of the game is also a little hidden, as it's not the first option available for us to select, giving the impression that its greatest feature is more of an afterthought. While Encounters in Space had its mission mode, where we were given some options for creating our own character and selecting a name for them, Climax UC has a full campaign mode dedicated to allowing us to create our own character and leveling them up as we want. But in order to get the most out of these RPG elements, it might be recommended to play to the game's Chronicle mode first. At the very start of the game, you'll see the first game mode that the game has to offer. This is known as Chronicle mode, and it is, as I just said, very similar to Ace Pilot mode from Encounters in Space, which was also released for the PlayStation 2. However, this doesn't really explore the characters' stories and background in the same way that Ace Pilot mode did. If anything, it is more of a greatest hits compilation of events that are only limited to the anime. So if you're thinking about something that happened in some manga, forget it, it's not in here. The cutscenes are also mostly limited to picture stills, with some narration, often limited to one picture per cutscene, which, to be fair, Encounters in Space had a lot of this as well. But Encounters in Space also added scenes from the anime to almost every Ace Pilot mode mission, some of which were anime scenes made specifically for the game. Climax UC does not.
We've got to take out the engines. Now, fire!
The Albion escaped without a scratch.
On the other hand, Climax UC on occasion will show some in-game cutscenes adapted from the anime that actually work really well.
肉体があるからやれるのさ。もらった。
浜！
相打ちと言いたいが、私の負けだな。
その潔さをなんでもっと上手に使えなかったんだ。こんなところで戦ったって何も。
下がれ。帰ってきてよかった。
浜！
強い子に会えて。
If it sounds like I'm comparing this game to Encounters in Space a lot, that's because Climax UC is very similar with its game modes and gameplay. But don't worry if you didn't like Encounters in Space's gameplay style. Climax UC is more of a combination of Encounters in Space mixed in with some Gundam vs Zeta Gundam, and maybe a little sprinkle of Dynasty Warriors as well. Speaking of gameplay, let's go over the controls. To move around, you use the left analog stick or D-pad, depending on your choice. To dodge, you double tap left or right on the D-pad, so keep this in mind if you want to rely heavily on the analog stick. The camera is moved with the right analog stick, but its default inverted controls might make it difficult to control. To boost, you press X, and R2 to jump. Square is for your main weapon. You can also charge your attack up to 3 times by holding down the square button. Triangle is for your melee, and circle is for your special ability. Every mobile suit and pilot have their own special ability that you can choose from at the start of every mission. R1 is your secondary weapon, while L1 is your lock-on. Lastly, L2 is to remove your lock-on. This brings me to one of the game's biggest problems, the lock-on. When there are multiple enemies on the screen, you might struggle to lock on to the target that you want, even if it's right in front of you. There will be times when you're trying to lock on to an enemy right in front of you, but the auto lock-on keeps targeting the enemy that's furthest away from you. This means that the lock-on system can sometimes be your greatest enemy in any given mission with multiple enemies, which is most of them. As for the structure of the maps or stages, they are very similar to both Gundam vs Zeta Gundam and Encounters in Space, minus the rail shooter mechanics. And unlike Encounters in Space, where it was largely only limited to space missions, Climax, you see, actually has some ground missions. It's on these ground missions where I personally had the most fun. The gameplay shined brightest when you had buildings to take cover behind, while at the same time having almost every building be destructible, which forces you to keep moving. Unfortunately, most of the game still takes place in space or in the air. This is because Chronicle Mode strictly follows the events of the various anime stories, but somehow still manages to skip over many of the ground battles from the anime. For example, like when Amuro fought against the Guff, and even Operation Odessa is not included in this game. And then, there is the second greatest enemy in the game that you will encounter in almost every, if not all, missions. That being the dreaded invisible walls. This is a common issue that's seen throughout many Gundam games and across many console generations, and it's annoying every time you're trying to dodge enemy attacks. Or worst of all, when an enemy runs beyond the invisible wall where you can't hit them, but they can still hit you. This, along with the lock-on system, are the game's two biggest flaws. Fortunately, this last part was not as bad as it was in Encounters in Space. Looking back over to Chronicle Mode, these missions span from the 1-year war all the way to Gundam F91. This is broken up by the various anime and OVA stories that were already out by the time this game was made. So sorry to Unicorn and Thunderbolt fans. This game came out almost a full decade earlier. Now this is all in Japanese, so unless you speak Japanese, you're going to have to fill in the blanks with your knowledge from having watched the anime. If you are someone who has never seen Gundam, or not every series that's in here, don't worry, all the missions are basically point and shoot. On occasion, you will have to defend a warship, maybe once or twice, but you'll figure it out pretty easily, and it won't really spoil much of the story. That being said, don't expect any of these chapters to be as fleshed out as Amuro's story campaign was in Encounters in Space. Amuro has a handful of missions, while Char only has 2, but this is made up by the fact that he gets missions later on for Zeta and then SHs Counterattack, which, by the way, Zeta Gundam easily has the most missions out of all the time periods in this game, and is perhaps the closest thing that comes to this game's main story campaign. This is also where I have my biggest nitpick of the entire game. Despite the extra attention given to Zeta Gundam, the Rick Diaz, Metas, and Nemo are all missing from the game. And in the later cutscene, we also see the Byralands, but it doesn't seem to be in the game as far as I can tell. And I've already unlocked all 72 mobile suits. More on this later. After you complete all the time periods, you'll then unlock a secret extra mission, where you just have to fight all the Gundams one by one. This mission really just feels like it was added at the last minute, and really doesn't offer much in content or story. As I've stated earlier, this is more of a greatest hits compilation, with cherry-picked events throughout the series. However, this mode has a special feature. You see, after you complete each mission, and I do mean each mission and not the entire game and every mission, you can go back to any mission you have already completed and play with whatever mobile suit you want and whatever pilot you want. There are no limitations, regardless of the time period, you can pick whatever you want. If you want Amuro to pilot the Alex during the 1-year war, you can do that. If you wish the GPO-1 had a better pilot in 0083, you can select another pilot. There are no limits, so long as you have the mobile suit and pilot you want already unlocked. Just keep in mind that this is only limited to gameplay. The cutscenes all stay the same in the end. As for unlocking the mobile suits and pilots, all you need to do is defeat them in combat. It is preferable that you beat them using a level 2 or 3 charge attacks to increase your likelihood of getting them. Doing this for most of the enemies also helps to increase your overall score for every mission. As for unlocking the transformable suits in the game, you will need to unlock their flight mode and humanoid modes before you can play as them. You can check your progress by looking at your card collection. Now, the total number of cards here says that there are 72 mobile suits to unlock, but really it's closer to 60. The reason is because this is counting the transform modes I just mentioned. Also, some suits are exactly the same, but with some different colors, like the GM2s and the Gundam Mark IIs. After you're done with Chronicle Mode, you'll then get to unlock Extra Mode, where you get to play through various different scenarios. These missions are divided up by 3 different levels of difficulty, and the scenarios can range from fighting various boss enemies, taking out various enemy defense turrets in under a set amount of time, to shooting down a bunch of airships in the air while in flight mode. Which reminds me, before I forget, in this game, when you transform into flight mode, you do not consume any of your boost. You can stay in flight mode for as long as you want. This is actually a big deal for Gundam games, since most Gundam games have a boost limit for how long you can stay transformed. Unfortunately, aiming is a little tricky, and your offensive capabilities are limited, so you're not going to feel like you're piloting something out of Robotech, or even Ace Combat. Still, unlimited boost while transformed is a nice addition that I can appreciate, and I wish this was added into later single-player Gundam games. To finish off with Extra Mode, this is a pretty nice set of missions you can use to unlock most of what you have yet to unlock. Beyond that, don't expect some type of full-length campaign out of it, like in Encounters in Space. Okay, now for the good stuff. This game's true story campaign is actually in the progress mode. You can play this mode from the very start. I only recommend playing through Chronicle mode so you can gain experience and also unlock some suits in order for you to get the most out of this mode. If you've ever played through the mission mode from Encounters in Space, then the progress mode from Climax UC is everything you wished mission mode was, and even more. And unlike in mission mode where you only got one chance to pass a mission, in progress mode we can keep trying no matter how many times we fail, and not be penalized for it. And unlike in mission mode where you are only able to use your custom character in a versus match, once we complete our character in progress mode, we can use them in any Chronicle or extra mission we've already completed. Before we continue, and before someone jumps to the comment section, this mode was also adapted into a manga, but for the sake of this video, we are going to ignore it for now. So I ask that you please remain calm. I promise we will get to it later. When we start, we first are only able to play as Kamna Takabana. He is a preset character with no real customization options. Don't worry, we will be creating a new character eventually. Trust me and don't question the method. But first, we select which side we want to be on during the 1 year war. You can either choose to be a Federation pilot and fight for freedom, or a Dirty Zeon pilot. You can guess which side I chose, since being a Dirty Zeon pilot means you end up on the no-fly list. I'm joking. Kind of. After picking a side, we then have to choose what the nature of our pilot will be. Hot Blood means our pilot will be more focused on mobility and melee. Cool is geared more towards armor, and Gentle is the new type. Although, since I don't speak or read Japanese, this might not be entirely accurate. I did look online to confirm that the Gentle nature is the new type class. But then again, when you select Cool, you will start off with 5 points into your new type skills. So maybe try doing your own research as well, just to make sure. In any case, you can still add points into whatever category you want regardless of the nature you select. If you're wondering what exactly adding points into the NT does, it will allow you to use new type weapons on certain mobile suits. So mostly if you want to use funnels and other similar abilities. Also, before moving any further, take this time to write down the order that these skills are in. Because when you are putting points into your character, the English letters seen behind the Japanese will not appear. So, unless you know Japanese, you may have a hard time knowing where you want to put all of your skills into. If you forget at any time what the skills are, an easy way around this is to back out of the mode, and when you reselect your character, the skills will appear again with the English letters seen in the back. Moving on. After meeting our fellow pilots and operator, we are thrown into the meat grinder that is the battle for Jaburo. Before starting, we have the option of selecting what mobile suit we want. Only a few are available at this time. Keep in mind that the higher the rank you score in a mission also determines how many skills you would get for leveling up. A stronger suit can help you get an A or S rank a lot easier. However, you can also earn a little more extra points if you score high with the weaker mobile suit. So if you're playing this mode for the story, then pick the best suit you want. But if you want the most skills possible to make the best player possible, then try sticking to the grunts. For me, I chose the standard GM. It is not as good as the Gundam ground type, but still better than a dirty Zaku, so long as the pilot knows how to use it. And if Bandai and Sunrise aren't giving some dirty Zeon grunts some cheap plot armor. I have to say that this makes for a nearly perfect first mission, and since it's on the ground, makes it even more enjoyable, as it is easier to control. And so far, out of all the Gundam games that I have played, I have to say that this is my favorite mission when fighting at Jaburo. You have Gals flying overhead and dropping enemy suits, both of which you can shoot down. It feels like you're in an actual battle during the 1 year war instead of some small skirmish. So far, the only other game that comes close to this is Lost War Chronicles. After the battle, I earned 65 points that I can put into my character. I can also get some additional passive abilities, provided I have the necessary points in the right places. More on this later. Next up is Abaoku. We are sent into the final battle of the 1 year war, very similar to Encounters in Space, except with better controls. There are invisible walls here, as they often are in space missions, but it's not too bad. We take out numerous warships and mobile suits, and eventually run into Char. As far as I can tell, the mission will end once we've done enough damage to Char, after which we essentially reach the end of the one-year war.
やりましたね。味方部隊がアバーワ空中枢に到達。我々の勝利が確定したよ。
I scored an S rank on this mission, and since I used a GM, I managed to get 70 points to put into my pilot skills. We then jump ahead 3 years into 0083 Stardust Memories, where we had to help out the Albion. This is where I got a little too greedy and made a mistake of picking the GM again. Yes, it is a grunt, but this being 0083, I really should have gone with the GM custom. While picking a low-level grunt can potentially grant us more points, it might be better to select the grunt of whatever specific time period we're playing in, especially this early on in the campaign, since our pilot skills are not fully developed yet. I did eventually find out, however, that there is a specific passive skill that we can get that will boost our pilot's ability whenever picking a GM or Zaku. And in the end, I ended up getting a B, meaning not as many action points this time around. Still, we are making progress in developing a real ace. After the mission comes the Rise of the Titans, and this is where I started doing my own personal roleplay for this mode. Again, we are ignoring the manga for right now. I gave it some thought in trying to figure out how a Federation pilot who survived the one-year war and later Operation Stardust would feel. Many of them may have bought into the Titans propaganda, believing it was the best way to prevent Zeon or anyone else from ever dropping another colony. Keep in mind that this would have been an entire generation traumatized by the worst war in history. Joining the Titans is a mistake in hindsight, of course, but an interesting premise. This is where I feel the Titans had so much wasted potential for being an actually interesting faction within the UC timeline. And in the beginning of Zeta Gundam, we did see some of that potential. Jared, for example, talked about trying to change the Titans from the inside, but that eventually went nowhere. And then there was Emma, who actually did switch sides over to the AUG. So for my playthrough, I selected the Titans for my pilot to join, a decision he would regret for sure. But still, narratively, a very plausible possibility for many Federation pilots. And for our first mission with the Titans, we have to back up the Psycho Gundam. This mission doesn't offer much, but what I love about it is seeing the destructible environment. This is really nothing new for Gundam games at the time, but it wasn't always seen on this scale, and it's a feature that's been missing from the more recent Gundam games. This mission is fairly short, and so I start making up my own headcanon, where my pilot begins to question the Titans' methods after seeing the Psycho Gundam damage a populated city. To anyone who speaks Japanese, I am aware that there's obviously narration in between the missions that explain more in depth of what's actually going on. But I don't speak Japanese, and there are no English subtitles here, so I'm guessing. One last time, we're ignoring the manga for right now. For the next mission, we jump towards the end of the Grips War, where the Titans make their last stand. I do feel like this was a missed opportunity to go further into the time period, since it's hardly ever visited in side stories compared to the one-year war. It would be interesting to have a mission where Neo Zeon crashes access into a Baoku, which was controlled by the Titans at the time. At the end of the mission, we would have to dodge debris from the collision while still evading enemy fire. But oh well, here we are. This mission is basically the same as Mission 2, where Zeon makes its final stand, but just from a different perspective. Okay, so now with the Titans gone, our pilot is able to switch sides over to the AUG. This is a win-win. 1. He's free from being with the corrupt and tyrannical group, and now has to fight actual Zeon again, just like he always wanted, and was the reason why he signed up for the Titans in the first place. Not gassing a colony just because they protested against your side. So, now we're in the first Neo-Zeon war. For a moment, I debate using the Gundam Mark II for this era, but ultimately settle on the GM2 with the AU colors. Would have been nice if it was the Nemo, but as I said earlier in this video, for whatever reason, it's not in the game. Instead, we get two different colored Hyzax, GM2s, and Gundam Mark IIs. Anyway, this time around we had to protect the Argama. Defense missions are hardly ever fun, but this one's actually not bad. As long as you don't mess up too bad, it's pretty easy defending. We don't get to fight Haman or fight alongside the Double Zeta, but I still have fun. Now comes time for SHs Counterattack. We're welcomed into Londo Bao by Amuro Ray himself, so we're buddies now. We go picking up on waifus at the bar every Friday, and I actually introduced him to Chan. Yes, I'm making this all up because I don't understand the language. Again, we're ignoring the manga for right now. Just let me have this. We now get to take part in the battle at the end of SHs Counterattack, and this time around, we get to use the Jagan as the grunt for the time period. Nothing much to say here, to be honest. It's all standard shoot down waves of enemies until the final boss shows up. For this mission, the final boss is Gyuni in his Jack Doga. It's not that hard of an enemy boss. And while we can't exactly kill him because he eventually has to fly away and get one shot by Amuro, we do have to lower his health to a certain point in order to complete the mission. His most annoying ability is his dummy balloons, as they can mess with our lock-on. And remember, the lock-on system in this game can at times be our greatest enemy. Most of the SHs Counterattack era mobile suits have this ability, by the way, even the Jagan, so I can at least use this skill against him as well. We take out a few more enemies and the mission ends. While leveling up my character, I decide to finally select some passive abilities. There are no English translations for these in the game, and I confess I was just guessing at this point. But there are two ways around this if you're like me and don't know Japanese. The first is by comparing the skills other pilots have in the game and basically just copy them. And the second is by going online and finding a guide. I made my own little chart based off of my research online, so this may not be entirely accurate. Shout out to New Type Ace from GameFAQs for making this list all the way back in 2006. We then get another cutscene with some narration telling us what happened at the end, which if you've seen the movie, then you already know. And now we finally get to create our own character. You'll first have to select a waifu. I'm not joking, you literally have to pick who's going to be the wife to the character you've been playing as up until right now. It's also not just an aesthetic choice, as each of the three choices offer different stats to mix with your own that will be passed on to your new character. So you can either choose to select a partner who will further boost the skills you've been building up, or a partner who will help make up for any skills you've been sort of neglecting up until this point. For the first two options, you have Ellen and Shirley, and you can get an idea of what stat boost they both offer. But the third option is a childhood friend who we don't get to know what her stats are until we select and commit to her. From what I've read online, this third option could potentially offer the best stats. For me, I went with Shirley, since she was a pilot who fought alongside us and actually made it out alive. Female pilots who survived the end of a war in Gundam are pretty rare, so you have to snatch them up whenever you can. Again, we are ignoring the manga for right now. And now we get to select our own preset character model. There are 4 we can choose from. Beyond selecting what faction to start off with, there's absolutely no additional character customization options beyond this point. Since I went with Shirley, who has red hair, I went with this character model with the pink hair, as she maybe sort of resembles her a little. We then get to select our character's name. The alphabet is not in English, so we either have to guess and pick at random, or go online and guess what alphabet this is actually using. By the looks of it, this might be the one right here. Again, I'm guessing. Now we have our own character and are ready to fight in the battles that take place during the Gundam F91 movie. This is where my ability to fill in the blanks with my knowledge of the various anime and OVAs sort of ends. I have a pretty good idea of what happens in the first battle, but beyond this, it's all uncharted territory for the most part. Now, unfortunately, this game did not include the F-71G cannon or the RGM-109 heavy gun that we see in the movie. I guess they figured that since the movie also included Jagans, that would be enough, which is kind of a fair point, I guess. At least we also get the Crossbone Gundam X1 through 3, along with the F-90. For our new pilot, I decided to make her pilot of the Rigazi, because I feel like the Rigazi deserved a lot better than it got in SHs Counterattack. It's a standard battle here, nothing special. There is one boss fairly early on. And that's pretty much all there is for this mission. Moving on. Mission 9 is basically the same as the previous one. Story-wise, I'm not sure what's really going on. I do know that this was still taking place around the same time during the F91 movie, or relatively close to it, since I had to fight against 2 other characters as bosses. That's right, you had to fight against 2 enemy bosses at once. It's not exactly the hardest fight though. There is a mission in Chronicle mode where you had to fight against 3 Gundam ground types while in the Gov Custom after all. And there is a mission later on where you have to fight against the Zeta and Double Zeta at the same time. I'm not exactly sure what happens here because I'm not familiar with the Crossbone Gundam manga or story. I have heard about it, obviously, but I know next to nothing about it. Based off of the visuals, it seems like we actually switch sides. I'm not sure why this is, as in another playthrough with another character, I actually managed to keep my character on the same side for the entire playthrough. It might have been because earlier on I played with the Titans, but I'm still not sure on this. Anyway, this next mission has us going up against a bunch of mass-produced Gundam F91s. I guess this is where I should talk a little bit about the manga that this game mode was adapted into. The manga is titled The Bonds of the Bloodline, and the story follows a family through the various wars of the Universal Century. And by the time Crossbone takes place, the original character we followed in the beginning finds out that his son is fighting on the other side. It looks like that is maybe what's going on in this game. Although we never see the dad again after SHs Counterattack in this game. I purposely stayed away from the manga while playing this game to see if I could still enjoy it and more or less follow along. And for the most part, I was able to. I did eventually take a look at the manga later on, which I won't really talk about in this video. If you're interested, go ahead and take a look at it yourself. It's not too bad, or wait until you've played through the game so you can at least enjoy some role-playing in a Gundam game. Anyway, since I'm going up against a bunch of F91s, I decided to take out the Crossbone Gundam X1, which, as far as I can tell, it looks like this thing fires nukes, a little similar to the GPO-2 from 0083, and it practically blinds me every time it fills the screen with nothing but giant balls of white light. And that's pretty much it after this mission. After we're done, we can see a timeline of our history. It's all in Japanese, so again, I don't know what it really says. But now we can use our character in any mission we have already completed in Chronicle and Extra mode. We can literally play through all of Chronicle mode with our character. So, is Gundam Climax a fun game? I have to say yes. Progress mode alone has a lot of replay value, as there are different paths you can take. You can choose not to join the Titans, or start off as a dirty Zeon pilot, who eventually learns the error of their ways and switches sides over to the Ayug or Londo Bell. And there are some different missions in different locations depending on what faction you choose. You will also spend hours trying to unlock all the different mobile suits and pilots. Climax UC is a game that does not overstay its welcome, while still offering many hours of replay value if you want it. Anyway, that's it for this video. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And thanks for watching.